Senator Bernie Sanders is our final guest this morning. He spent a lot of time on the Senate floor yesterday discussing his amendment to the financial regulation legislation that would require an audit of the Fed. Why do you want to do that, Senator?
Well, I think at a time when you have the Fed lending out several $1 trillion of taxpayer money to the largest financial institutions in this country, and not telling the American people who receive that money, not telling the American people what these large financial institutions are doing with this money, what the collateral was. I think the American people have a right to know. You know, it's funny, Susan, we have major debates on the floor of the Senate about $10 million, whether we should spend it or not. And yet you have the Fed controlling and spending huge amounts of money, and the American people know very little about where that money is going. And about a year ago, Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, was before the Budget Committee on which I serve. And I said, Mr. Bernanke, tell the American people who received this money. And he said, not going to do that. And on that day, we introduced legislation to bring transparency to the Fed. The other point is that we're calling for a GAO audit because it seems to me, and this is what the GAO has got to determine, but it seems, I think, to the average person that there are huge conflicts of interest within the Fed, which operates with a great deal of secrecy. For example, you had Lloyd Blankstein, who is the CEO of Goldman Sachs, sitting in a room arguing that AIG should be bailed out to the tune of $182 billion. Well, when that bailout took place, it turns out that Goldman Sachs gets $13 billion, 100 cents on the dollar, as a result of that transaction. Is that a conflict of interest? I think it is. And there are many other conflicts of interest when you have the heads of the largest financial institutions in this country making decisions which benefit themselves. And I think we need to shed light on what goes on in the Fed. And I'll tell you, Susan, I made this point on the floor yesterday. What is the funniest thing that I have kind of ever seen in terms of an amendment is we have the weirdest group of bedfellows, political bedfellows, coming together. I think, one of the most progressive members of the Senate, and I'm working with some of the most conservative people in the Senate. You have some of the most progressive grassroots organizations in this country, MoveOn.org. You have the AFL-CIO, you have the SEIU, all progressive organizations who I work with very often. And then you have the National Taxpayers Union, you have the Eagle Forum, you have some of the most conservative organizations. So we have brought together a very strange coalition of grassroots organizations, progressive and conservative, to say, let there be transparency at the Fed. Let the American people know.
And you think there might be a vote on this as early as today?
That's what we think.
In fact, last night I was telling the Senator, I saw him on CNBC with Jim DeMint of South Carolina, an illustration of the co-sponsors and the different political points of view they bring to the table. But one important constituency that does not agree is the White House, pushing back on this. Why are they pushing back?
Well, it is absolutely true that Tim Geithner has been on the phone lobbying against this. You'll have to ask them their reasons. But one of the arguments that we've been hearing against this amendment, which simply is not true, is that as a result of this amendment, Congress is now going to be involved in monetary policy, determining whether interest rates go up or not. We're going to be interfering with the independence of the Fed. That is not the case. And language in the amendment is very, very clear. But let me also say this. It's not just the White House. It's obviously the Fed itself. Bernanke was visiting senators just the other day, according to media. We have Wall Street, who is lobbying very heavily against this. Let's be clear. In an amendment like this, what we are doing is taking on some of the most powerful people, not just in the country, but in the world. People who led us through their greed and their recklessness, and in my view, their illegal behavior, led us into this terrible recession, which has been devastating to the middle class. And then out of the ruins of the Wall Street collapse, they are now paying out huge bonuses to their CEOs. And they like that. They like a system which allows them to continue to do what they do in secrecy, playing with trillions of taxpayer dollars. So, of course, there's going to be massive opposition. On the other hand, what I will tell you is not only have we brought together a strong left-right coalition and strong grassroots support, you have Bloomberg News, among other media, having gone to the federal courts, arguing that the information about who received these Fed loans should be made public, and two federal courts saying, yeah, it should be made public. The House of Representatives, led by a conservative, Ron Paul, and a progressive, Alan Grayson, passed language which is now incorporated into the House bill, which talks about, in a significant way, transparency at the Fed. So this is not a radical idea. It's passed the House. You got courts ruling in the way. We got a lot of senators on board. I hope our friends in the Senate can stand up to the huge money and pressure that's going to come down on them on this amendment.
Well, let's get to calls. West Palm Beach, Florida. Debbie, Democrats line. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yes, hi. Senator Sanders, I just want to say thank you very much for helping to lead the battle against the Federal Reserve. It's taken us over a decade to raise awareness, and I think we've turned this boat around in the last couple of years, that people finally are understanding that the Federal Reserve is a private banking entity. So thanks to you, to Ron Paul, Alan Grayson, that represents a nice coalition of Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Also, I'm very concerned that they're trying to bury the secrets with this AIG scandal. There are rumors that and one of the reasons AIG was targeted for a takeover was that banks were resubmitting the same defunct loans and bad derivatives for insurance claims multiple times. So I think they're trying to bury that. I hope that comes out in the wash.
Well, Debbie, this is, I mean, you've asked reasonable questions, and I don't know the answer, but that's what you need a GAO audit to do. There are a lot of unanswered questions that the American people have a right to know.
The law prohibiting the GAO from looking at several key areas, they do some audits of the Fed, according to a Wall Street Journal Q&A. Under existing law, GAO audits a wide variety of Fed programs, but the nonpartisan GAO has been prohibited in 1978 from looking at several key areas, including transactions involving foreign central banks, foreign governments, or non-private international financing organizations, et cetera. Do you know what the thinking was? That wasn't that long ago, from 1978, for this to be instituted.
No, I don't know. But what I also know, what's very important, is a result of the financial collapse of a couple of years ago, the role of the Fed has been significantly expanded. They are into new territory, and the GAO has got to take a look at what they have done and the potential conflicts of interest and who has received what.
And what are you also proposing to do with the transcripts of their meetings?
Well, at a certain period, not right away, and again, we want to make it very clear that the Fed has got to remain as an independent institution, but at a certain period, transcripts, of course, should be made public.
Next question or comment for Senator Sanders, Norwalk, Connecticut. Mickey, Republican line.
How you doing?
Good morning.
Thanks a lot. I've never been on the show before, and I could be a scatterbrain because there's so many issues I want to cover. Number one, the reason why I'm on the Republican line is because I've been a 37-year-plus registered Democrat, about to change my party to Republican, because I am very dissatisfied with the way that Democrats have been handling everything. We've got people from the 60s, including Bill Ayers, that are partners with Obama. I'm from Chicago originally. I know the Chicago politics. And so one of the things that I'm listening to you about, first of all, I agree, definitely we got to do something with doing something with the Fed. So what is it? Do something with monitor the Fed or whatever. Okay. So I got that point. Now, I'm also going to be joining the Tea Party because I believe one of the things I want to point out on this conversation is that Tea Party people are not just Republicans, they are independents, they are Democrats, and they're not happy with the way the administration is running the country right now. Okay? Obama, the Joyce Foundation, all these different organizations you mentioned, SEIU, AFL-CIO, unions are ruining this country.
Mickey, I'm going to jump in at that point.
Well, you know, I think, in fairness, people are unhappy with what's going on in this country today for a good reason. The reality is the middle class is collapsing, poverty is increasing. We have a huge national debt. We have a huge deficit. We're fighting two wars. We're not addressing climate change. The gap between the very rich and everybody else is growing wider. But to blame all of that on Barack Obama, I think, is simply unfair, in my view. You had for 8 years a Bush administration which largely ignored the most important issues facing this country. And I think one of the reasons that Obama is getting a lot of criticism is to his credit, whether you agree with what he's trying to do or not. And I disagree with a lot of what he's doing on Wall Street. But at least he is saying that we can't allow the most important issues in this country to be swept under the rug. You got to deal with the fact that we end up spending almost twice as much per person on healthcare as any other nation, and you got 46 million people uninsured. You got to deal with that. You have to deal with climate change, and we can create millions of jobs transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel. You got to deal with it. In general, I am supportive of the Obama administration. I think it's unfair to blame him for all of the problems that we have and ignore what took place before.
Next call is from Dallas. Albert, Independent Line.
Hi. I completely agree with you on your last statement about blaming it all on Obama. However, there are a lot of things that you can blame on Obama as well. So, and I am part of the Tea Party movement as well, and I don't think that they're represented very well in the media. A lot of people that I am associated with want to end the Federal Reserve. We need to end the Federal Reserve. It's an illegal institution. It's basically a counterfeiting agency that is allowed to print paper money. But I really wish that, I know that you said you don't want to go get rid of the Federal Reserve, but I'm completely on board if you will say that, because we need to go back to a debt-free money system that we had when Abraham Lincoln was in power. Well, that the Treasury actually was in charge of the money supply.
Well, Albert, you raise an interesting question, which we're not going there today. I mean, my amendment is pretty narrow in the sense that let the American people know what's going on. That's what we're trying to do. I should also mention, Susan, that in addition to trying to bring transparency to the Fed, we're working on a couple of other very important amendments. I think that the financial institutions who own credit card companies are performing outrageously when they are charging people 25 or 30% interest rates on their credit cards. So one of the amendments that we will bring up before this debate is over is a cap on credit card interest rates, similar to what exists for credit unions, which is now 15%, except under extraordinary circumstances. I get calls from Vermont every single week, people saying, Bernie, I paid my bills on time every month, and they raised me from 15% to 30%. I think that is unacceptable. We have to have a cap on that. And the other area I'll be working with Senators Brown and Kaufman on is a very important issue. And that is, right now we have 4 financial institutions in this country, the 4 largest, that have own assets of over $7 trillion, which is more than 50% of the gross domestic product of this country. And I think at the end of the day, if we are serious about never again having a huge bailout of Wall Street, you got to break these guys up. It is wrong when 4 institutions issue 2/3 of the credit cards in this country and half of the mortgages control 40% of the deposits. And so long as you have institutions so large, you will, in my view, when they start teetering, you are going to have to bail them out. And second of all, I worry about a competitive economy when so few control so much. So those are some of the other issues that we're working on to strengthen this financial reform bill.
And there is a New York Times article about this, if you want to read it today, in the business section. David Herzenhorn, Senate liberals moved to toughen bill regulating Wall Street, and they would do what the senator explained by imposing caps on the deposits that the big banks can hold and limits on other liabilities.
And this is an issue, I say, that has not gotten the attention that it deserves. When you have 4 institutions.
And what are they?
This is Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and J.P. Morgan Chase. Those 4 financial institutions control more than 50% of the GDP of America. You know, Teddy Roosevelt, a good Republican, 100 years ago said, break up large financial institutions. I think we've got to do the same.
Next up is Asheville, North Carolina, and this is Judy, Democrats line. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I'm glad that you're going to do something or try to get something done about the Federal Reserve being audited, because the Geithner, I mean, there's just something needs to be looked into. But everybody keeps talking